Good evening, everyone. Professor York here. I am doing a quick recap on the Goob overview lecture. I may touch on a little bit on questioning strategy as well, but this is really geared so that you are better oriented to the upcoming 5 Goob interviews that you will need. And that is get out of the building, because that's how we learn from our customers. So I think you may be thinking about, we got this thing called the BMC, or the Business Model Canvas, and what you have on this Business Model Canvas are guesses. So, what's amazing in many startups, and I see this particularly in technical, is talk to customers. What do customers have to do products that eventually we want them eventually buy? And I worked in a company where they said, just throw it over to marketing, they'll market it. And what I've learned over the years has been that even in early stages, we need to have market research and the voice of the customer. And it is invaluable because the customer is going to lead you in the direction of what is the real need, what they are going to buy, and the traction. It's going to create traction for a product. So, that's very, very important. And so to do that is we have to do interviews. So why do we do interviews? And there's a great book, which I would recommend to all of you, by Simon Sinek, which is Start With Why. And, we pivot to what we do, but why is the motivation? And it's the motivation for great organizations, great leadership. But in a startup, a why is really the major driver. And we do why because it defines motivation. So we want to gain motivation by our customers to understand what their problems are and ultimately what would drive them to a particular solution, which could be a product or service. So, as you can see in this particular cartoon from Griff Constable, which I recommend his book, which is called Talking to Humans. I love it. You got these guys who are behind the computers and they're designing everything and they've storyboarded it out. And they go, if I were a teenage girl, I would love a new product. Well, have you actually talked to one? And leave this room? And I think that says it all. And we see in many different companies where people who are developing products don't get out of the office and talk to customers. So we're going to goob, or get out of the building. And there's, really 3 things we want to do. We want to figure out what the core issues are they have regarding the problem that they have. So we're going to have to, as I talked about in classes, we're going to peel the onion here. And we need to think about, what if our intended solution doesn't even fit the person's needs? Because many of us will have an intended solution. It's an app, or there's something that's in there. And the other piece is, what if the problem is actually not really an issue, which, is amazing. It may not be in the top 5 and top 2. So I think the take-home error is that it is about your customer at the end of the day, not the product. Now, I'm going to introduce a concept called the magic circle, which I learned about when I took a great market research class over at Berkeley that was taught by an individual who's vice president of Foursquare. And what I want to just get high level is the first quadrant here, which is understand the problem, is so critical. You need to really understand and clarify the needs and what the questions are. So as we start our research process in terms of interviewing, we need to think about what are the questions that we need to ask, and we need to prioritize and make sure that we really specified our objectives, and we keep on cycling. So in the business that I work, which is a consulting business, we have to really work collaboratively with our clients. As you as a team, you're really going to have to focus on what are the most important questions, to understand the problem that you're trying to get at. And if you can get this really right, you're ahead of everybody else. Okay, and this is critical to market research, which for companies who do have products is paramount. And then you set the appropriate design. This case is going to be qualitative one-on-one research, so you want to do it live. You'll execute it by doing your interviews, and then you'll communicate it. And that'll be in your summary. That'll come back to me. But also in terms of your changes you make in your business model canvas, and even in your presentations. And these things interplay with each other. So I know it's complicated, but I'll tell you what. If you get a handle on the strategy, you'll be ahead of the game. So what do we have the job at hand is we have interviews. We have 5 per individual, okay? Not 5 per team, but we're talking if you have 5 people, that means 25. And we're talking about three weeks, maybe 4 weeks. And it needs to be in person. You know, you could do it by the phone, but I ideally like to see it in person. And the reason why it's better is because you can read the individual facial expressions, looking in the eyes. As one of the students in the class mentioned, the eyes just don't lie. And so if you can do it in person, great. I do a lot of interviewing both live as well as on phone, but I always like to be able to read the body language. And our key deliverables are going to be first, we're going to have, as you look in the syllabus and you look at the update in the calendar and schedule, you will see we're going to have what we call question funnels, discussion guide. Draft questions, you'll modify. And then each individual will do 5 Goobs. And then for each Goob, you'll write up them individually. And you'll find from me, I'm going to look at not just what went on, but what did you learn and how does it impact what you're doing going forward with the business model canvas. So it's application, not just, oh, I'm taking in information, but application in terms of what you're doing for your business. And this is going to be very important to your team. So we have a thing in market research we call the discussion guide. And it helps just to guide in terms of how your discussion should be. It shouldn't be that you rattle off these questions so it sounds like basically they're doing a survey. But I'll give you, and we'll go into this in a few minutes, is 2 things to think about. One is you have these key high-level funnel areas that you want to cover. And then within each funnel, as you do a primary question, you may have secondary questions that you want to drill down. And I like to use the analogy of peeling the onion because we're trying to learn more. And as we get a response, we want to better understand that response because that could make it break based on the response and the description as to why that is important or not. So we have primary questions, and the primary questions are usually early in the interview. They don't directly state the problem, but lead into those that do. So think about it if you're going out on a date, or you're going to ask somebody to date, and you're at a bar. Okay, that's simple. You're going to break the ice. You're going to try to find some commonality. You're going to really try to build relationship. So I call them icebreakers. Okay, think about going to the bar. So first and foremost is I use this tool called the funnel. So you want to know whether the individual you're interviewing is in your profile or not. So you got a sort of a sense. And if you think about that, I'm going to exchange with this individual because I'm interested. Maybe we'll go on a date and see where it goes. You're going to start there, see if it's in or out. But then there's background in terms of who the person is, attitudes and experience that the individual has. And then we get into the job to do, which is, as we talked about previously, the pains and gains, the job to do, which is tied to the value proposition canvas, which is most critical here. I think really getting this tight is going to help you because then you say, well, how do you address that job to do? And I have a few tips in terms of how to do that, and how would you value that? In many ways, you can ask those questions and not have to share what your product looks like. So then we transition from our softball questions or early questions, relationship questions, to more of winning the topics. And when I do market research, again, it could be a few questions, it could be back and forth. I can gather some information with quick question and then backfill. And again, a lot of this is conversational if you do it right. And the individual who you're talking with, believe it or not, doesn't feel like they're being interviewed. But you always want to have like a few transition questions just to be able to make sure you can bridge from that initial, where we're doing breaking the ice, to really the more main section questions that we're going to talk about. And like, here's a few examples. How often do you, it's something related to experience this, what problems do you have with, it could be how engaging, customers or first-time customers, make sure they're loyal, or, whatever, which is a big problem. Okay. But, I think these are important issues to sort of start. We're peeling the onion and we're breaking the ice here. And then we get into the main interview, which is really, really I call it the nitty gritty. This is what we want to know. And one of the things I will challenge you guys, and as I look at things, is I want to see how specific you can go. I want you to be positive. I have 5 to 10 questions, and I know you're not going to get 10. But if you get a few good quality questions that really drill down to understand what's going on, then you're going to be successful. And I'll give you an example later on. So here's some examples of some what I call main interview. How do you feel about, and then you put the problem. And you can do it qualitatively by just leaving it open, or you can do it quantitatively. But, how do you feel? And if you had to put on a scale, 1 to 7, and you put some anchors, 1 being, it really sucks, or, boy, I really love this, 7, and then you put a midpoint at 4, just to anchor some feelings. That's another way of doing that. Now, the thing that you then go from there is, what do you do to solve the problem? And I think that's important because it shows about motivation. Somebody thinks that something's a real problem, they're going to be, especially your innovative people and your early adopters, are going to go out and they're going to try to solve the problem somehow. And then the last but not is the magic wand. And the magic wand is, if you can invent something or fix a problem, what would it look like, or what would it do, and how would it solve the problem, and why? So, right there, you've got, if you ask those questions, you get a good flow, you could have a great 10, 15 minutes conversation. It's amazing. When you ask people questions and get them talking about, you can get them going for a lot more than 5 minutes. Okay, and if you're not, then you need to frame it and you have to backfill. And we'll talk about a little bit more interviewing techniques on Wednesday. Now, also is that you got to keep an open mind and pivot, and realize that the feedback you're getting may not mesh with what your opinions or what you visualize, in your business model canvas, and that's okay. And we've had several teams that have come mid-quarter and just said, feedback we're getting just is not meshing. This is where we see we have to do in making major pivot. And one of the teams that did it in real estate business, several of the folks who did that just did it really well. They did it with their presentations, and the leader of the team ended up doing such a great job. He got, an A in class, and I think that's where you all are striving for. And what I do not want to see, and I see this sometimes with some teams, I see it sometimes with group that I consult with in San Diego, is they pivot to the MVP or the product. I do not want to see any discussion or presentation of the MVP or minimum viable product or specifically to your minimum viable product. So what I am looking for, have you organized the topic areas in terms of big buckets, or we call them funnels? What type of questions? Are they open or closed? And I particularly like open-ended, but there can be some more closed-ended if you're trying to quantify particular feelings, and then you pull your data in terms of the responses, and they line up to the questions as well as the questions roll up to topic areas. And they're going to be very critical from a form standpoint. So pay attention to this if you want to do, this is the difference between an A and a B on your Goobs. And then you get to what did you learn? And how did it change your BMC assumptions? And based on what you learned, did you pivot or did you stay the same? What drove? And the big issue is what drove your change. And what I'm trying to do is get you to start thinking about data-driven decision making rather than just, I have a gut feel. Because when you have data that drives where you're going, you have more confidence. And when you communicate to your investors or your board, you have something to stand on. Now, I'm just going to give you a quick example here in terms of, you can see here, this is the rubric, and I will post the rubric. And if I've done it right, wow, amazing, it did it. I have hyperlinked into the actual document, which this is like fantastic. So I have a Goob that was graded. This was actually perfect, it was well done. But what did it look like? And believe it or not, the Goob write-up is not overly, it's like 2 pages. And if you think about it, little top line abstract. Here my question highlight. What he's done is in blue he's put his responses or highlights. He's put his major funnels. As you can see, background, screening, attitudes, JTD, addressing JTD, all the things that we talked about. And he had his core questions. It's 1 or 2. So, as I said, a few per. His responses, what he learned, and potential changes. This is textbook. You want to get 100 on your Goobs. This is what you do, and you take that and you apply it. So I'm going to share this with you. I want you to be successful, but it's up to you. Okay? So that's the example. And to wrap up, I've put some due dates. I think I may have updated a few of the due dates, so go check the updated schedule. But what you have at this point is a real nice overview on Goobs, and I certainly hope I've set the stage for you so that you can be able to approach our next discussion, which will be on interviewing, with the right frame of mind in terms of how I can use the tools that I'll share on interviewing so that you can do the best interviews. Because just take a step. I know it's a class, but take a step back and say, what if this was my business? Wouldn't I want to take all the time and diligence to really learn that I'm in the right direction and that I'm spending effective amount of time and that I am getting data that is going to allow for individuals to get behind me, both as employees and investors, so I can be successful. And that, at the end of the day, is why I share this with you, because I look towards your success. Okay, for those individuals who did not attend today, which was February 5th, I do understand flu bugs running around. I know that other individuals had some other commitments. What I do expect is a one-page write-up by the 12th to summarize the key points. Thank you much, and have a great evening.